So now let's do a quick review on if, elif, else statement, right? So if we want like to do a quick description about like this statement in the Python, if is just a way to check a condition, right? If a condition becomes true, do something. If it is wrong, it doesn't do something, right? It does something else. So for example, you can see on the right side, right? The window is divided into 3 parts, right? We have like a top part, and this is like when the y is less than 500, right? And for example, for that condition, like if mouse y less than 500, we don't care about x, right? So if x is like, for example, less than 500 or more than 500, we don't care. So in this line, you just care about the y, which means that you just care about if it is on the top half of the screen or not, right? But then let's say it is not in the top half. Let's say it is on the like the bottom half, right? Then in that case, this condition becomes false, right? So the program going to run this line, right? So for example, here you can see whenever this circle comes here, which means that the mouse of x is less than 500. And of course, the mouse of y is more than 500, right? Because if you remember, we start from 0, 0 from the top left. And as you move down, the y increases, right? So for y more than 500 and x less than 500, we can see that the field star becomes blue. And if the computer like checks this condition and see that it is still false, it's going to run the else, right? So it's going to make it green. And the only thing that is left is this part, right? So you can see that if it is less than 500, it becomes red, it goes down. And if the x now is less than 500, right? If the x is less than 500, means that you're on the left, it becomes blue. And then whenever it goes to the right, which is the else part, it becomes green. Perfect. Now we have also the logical operators, right? Which means that you are trying to connect two, for example, or more statements for example, and or, like these two, this and or, right? So the and is true if all of the statements are true, right? And the or is true if at least one of them is true, right? So if at least one of the statements is true, then it is true. So for example, in this one, we can see that both of them are true because 5 is bigger than 3, of course. 6 is bigger than 3, so we can see this is true. But the bottom one, this one, is false. Why? Because the first one is true, but the second one is false. And we know that the statement can be true only if all the statements are true. So when you see at least one of them becomes false, you can say that like the whole statement becomes false. Now for the or, this is true and this is false. But again, the whole statement becomes true because you have at least one true here. That is okay. And for the second one, both of them are false. So you don't have any true. So the statement becomes false. Now the not a statement is just get a statement, right? If it is true, make it false. And if it is false, it make it true, right? So for example here, oops, sorry. So here you can see that it is, let me see if I can move this one here. Perfect. So here you can see that, for example, 6 is less than 3. It is false, but the not of it becomes true, right? And the 6 is bigger than 3, which is true, but the not of it becomes false. And here, for example, this is just a quick example, right? How, for example, we can like put them together. Like, for example, you can have like the if, and then you can use not. But this is just not and together. Like it's like not left, right? And bottom, right? So for example, here you have two statements, right? If the bottom and not left, right? So when you see like and not, you can just think of it as two statements, but one of the statements is just not of like the left. But this is just a simple example. I'm not going to put a lot of time into it, so you can just go through it later on your end just to do like a quick view for yourself. So now we want us to talk about the new concept list here. So what is list? So probably most of you have heard of like a to-do list, right? So whenever like you want to create like a list of to-do things, you have a to-do list. Like which means that you have a list of items that you want like to do. So the list is a good way to hold or store or keep the multiple values, right? So for example, you want some sort of, you have some values and they are somehow related to each other and you want like to keep them together, right? Let's say you are in a class and let's say you have like, let's say there are 50 students in that class, right? So you have a list of name of the students, right? That is a list of name of the students, then that's it. And the list is a really good way to like store similar values, right? So not similar like in value or like in like the exact magnitude, but similar in a way that you think that they are similar in some way, right? For example, they are the name of the students, right? So this is a good way to store those values. So how can you say that the list? So this square bracket, right, tells the computer that this is a list, right? So for example, you can see here, we have some numbers and just put them in between the square bracket, right? And separate them with comma, right? So for example, this list have 4 numbers, right? So the list can have, for example, numbers, strings, or booleans, right? So you can have, for example, let me show you here. For example, the list can have numbers 1, 10, -5 or -4, -5, right? And then it's just a variable that has these 3 values. So you can say I'm going to print list here. Right? So it prints like 1, 10, -5, right? Or you can have Boolean, right? You can have true, false, false, for example, right? And then you can say, okay, I'm going to print list, right? So this is just a way to show like this list exists and it stores 3 Boolean variable or 3 Boolean value. Or here the list stores 3 integer numbers, right? Cool. Now, one of the questions that you may ask is, okay, so I have this list and let's say you want to, for example, get access to this 10 here, right? So how can you do that? So we have something that's called index. So index is a way it's like a reference. So it somehow tells the computer like what value you are looking for at what index. So for example, you can see here, we give the computer this value 101, -2, 303, 44. And the computer behind the scene, right? You don't see that, but behind the scene, consider like the index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, these values, right? So for example, if my list is from left to right, it's 101, -2, 303, 44. The first one has the index of 0, not 1. So it has the index of 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3, right? And index is a way that gives you like access to that number. So for example, let's say you want to get access to this 300, right? It is index 2 because we start at 0. So now you can say, okay, I'm going to print, for example, here, let's say I have 10 and or -5. This is at index 0, right? 0, 1, 2. I'm going to print the list 2 here, right? Which means that I'm looking for the number that is that has a position at index 2, so 0, 1, 2. So let's see, this is -5, right? For the index 0, which is just the first number. Perfect, right? So now you know that how you can get access to those values inside that list, right? So now there are a lot of ways that you can use the list, right? So let's say you want to, for example, create a circle. Now, if you remember, for the circle, we need 3 values, right? The x and y is the center, which was like the first 2 numbers, and the diameter. But now let's say you can create a list, right? That has like 3 values, 75, 150. You want to use these values as the XY coordinate and the diameter. So you can get access to those values using the index. You can say, okay, I'm considering, for example, the first number as my the value for the x coordinate. The second one, which is at index 1 for the y coordinate. And I have like, for example, 50 for my diameter, right? Because the computer knows that whenever the computer sees this, knows that the numbers is a variable that is a list because you set these numbers to a list, right? And then it just needs to get access to the value at index 0, right? So one thing that you need to remember is that the circle numbers doesn't work, right? Because the number is a single variable, right? If you give it to the computer treat this as just the first input here, right? Because you need 3 values, right? And first of all, there are 2 problems here. First of all, this is just a value, just a single number that you need to put as x, but here, these numbers here is a list, right? It's just not a single number, it's just a list which has 3 numbers. The other problem is that you are missing 2 other inputs, right? So you cannot do this. But for those who are curious, you can try this later. Of course, not here in this part when you have like a setup and draw, and then you can see if this works or not, right? So I'm not going to tell you guys what this does, but if you are interested, you can just Google it yourself. So it is not included in this course, but this is just for those who are a little bit curious about like how we can get values of these numbers using this star here. Okay, so let's forget about that. Now let's say you have some numbers, right? Some of these, and you want to modify, right? So let's say, for example, you have so let's say you have like some marks, which is like the marks like for the course, like let's say Python programming, right? So you get, for example, 100 out of 100. The other exam you get 990. The other one you get 95, and then 60, 50, and then 65, right? And then let's say, for example, someone asks you, okay, so what was like your first mark, right? You can say, okay, my first marks was 100, right? So this is like how you can get access to it, right? Let's say you want to change it. Let's say, for example, your 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say your first exam, you got 50, and that was a mistake. So you know that, for example, you go to the teacher, and then like the teacher says, hey, I made a mistake. Like your true mark is actually like, for example, 75. You can say, okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, which is the index 3. So my mark 3 is now 75. Now, if I print marks, right? So you have to remember the computer runs the line, runs the code line by line, right? So it starts from the beginning. It knows that the marks is this. Then as soon as the computer gets to this part, right, it knows that, okay, so now I have to set the value for the index 3 of the marks to 75. So now if you print marks now, it has 75, not 50 anymore. Sounds good? So we can say the list of marks after update, for example, or after change. And this is just a quick review for you guys. You can put the variable here and then put the F here, and you can just print it, right? The list of marks after change is 100, 90, 95, 75, 65. Perfect. So now we have a quick question for you guys. So we're going to have a poll. So what do you think, like, what is the diameter of the circle drawn in the setup? So we have this X, then we have X1, X3. This is how we are going to change the values, right? And then we're going to have a setup with the circles 150, 150, then X3. So let's see, I'm going to see what the answer would be. So don't forget that we are trying to change the values, right? You're trying to update the values. Pooja, I do not see the students answering like the poll, so maybe I cannot see like the result here. Can you let me whenever like you?
Yes, actually, I think I just need to make you co-host of the meeting. I'll close the poll in about 30 seconds.
Okay, sure, no worries. Just, you know. Okay. So we have 61. Okay.
Should be good to go. I closed it.
Okay, perfect. So for those guys who chose 100, congratulations, because I think that the answer is 100. So let's get it. Let's go through it together. So if you remember, we talked about like before. So if you have, for example, a variable called, let's say, z, for example, right? And let's say it is 4, you can say z is equal z plus 1, right? So you are updating z and put the new value inside the z again, right? So if you change z now, it is 5, right? So this is the same here. So you have the list, and then you get access to the value at the index 1. So the x1 is 40. So 40 plus 10 is 50 now. So now you set the x1 to 50, right? So the 50 is here. Now the x1 is 50, right? It is not 40 anymore. So it is 50 times 2 is 100. So now the x3, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, like instead of 80, you now have 100. So whenever you get access to get the value at index 3 with x3, right? The most updated value in that list at x3 is 100. So the answer is 100, which is the diameter, right? Okay, then. Now let's say you have a list, and let's say you want like, for example, to make it bigger, right? So this is, for example, like the shopping list. You want to go to the grocery store and get some stuff, and let's say you put on sort of like eggs, ham, cheese, onion, and then you say, oh my god, like I forgot something, I need to add something to, right? So how can we add new items to this list, right? So the way to do that is using the append. So let's do it here. So let's say I have a list, and let's say I have onion, I have cheese, let's say I have, I don't know, eggs, right? And then I want to add something. Let's say I want to add, for example, milk or bread. So this is the way to do it. So you can say list append milk, right? So now if I print my list of stuff after inserting new item, right, is my list here, and this is, so you can see my list of stuff after inserting new item is onion. So this is all here because like my window is small here, but you should see onion, cheese, eggs, and milk, right? One that you need to remember is that if you want to insert a new like value, like in this case is milk, to the end of the list with append, you cannot do this. You cannot say, okay, I'm going to do list equal s, right? It doesn't work like that. So I know that we talked about like z equals z plus 1, but this doesn't work in list like here. If you want to update the whole list and put it into the list, it gives you nothing. So if I want to put list here, right? Let's say this is list new, right? List new. And it is none, right? So you need to remember, you cannot add something and then put it in the something new or say list here, right? It's none, right? So when you update something and put it here like this equation mark, right? This doesn't work for this. So you have to just do it in single line without trying to assign it to a new variable. So just, or like the same variable even. So you can just say list append milk. Now this works. Now if I want to print list, now I can see that, okay, how it works. I have the 3 values and then the new value milk as well at the end. Perfect. Now that was like the way to make the list larger, right? But sometimes, let's say, for example, you purchase something, right? And you want like to remove it, right? You don't need to have it in your list, right? So you can use the remove. So the way that the remove works is just try to remove something from like item from your list. So let's say I want to remove here. After I append meat, I want to remove onion, right? If I print this, oops. Okay, I don't have L here, so that's really cool. Let's see the error here. X not in the list. Yes, of course, because it is not onion, it is onion, right? That was a typo. Perfect. So now I have cheese, eggs, and milk, right? Now, what if I have another onion here, right? Let's see if this remove both the onion or not, right? So now you can see we have cheese, onion, eggs. We have the milk because we append the milk, and we don't have the first onion in the beginning. So now you see that whenever you use the remove, it starts from the left of the list, like the beginning of the list. And as soon as it finds like the first item, right, that matches this word, it's going to remove it, right? But it doesn't touch any other items that match this name. So you need to be really careful, right? So these are the ways that you can play with the code to learn things on your own, right? So whenever you learn something new, it might be a good idea to play with it, right? To see what results you can get if you change something. Okay, so now this is like a way to get like the length of the list, right? So let's say you have a list of grocery store like this. And let's erase this because I don't want to make you guys get confused. So let's say I have a list. And let's say someone asks you, okay, so how many items you are going to purchase from the grocery store, right? So you don't need to purchase one by one, right? There is a cool way to do it. It says len as the length of the list, right? So now you can print it. It is 4, right? Or you can name it if you want like to learn. It says length of my list is the length of list. Length of this is 4. Perfect. So now we talked about the append, like how to make the list larger. We talked about the remove, right? Which removes the first item, right? Is equal to the item. We talked about the len, which is like the length of the list. We also have some other items, like we have like the index, we have sort, we have reverse. So for example, the index is the index of the first like item, like the item like that you are looking for. So let's say, for example, I have a list here. And let's say I want to look for the index of cheese, right? I know it is 1, right? But let's say you have a big, for example, really large list. You don't want to look it yourself. You want to like look it up yourself. You want like to use a way that you can find the index very quickly. So, oops, the index is not defined. So let's see. I have to do this. Let's see index cheese. Not this one, right? Okay, so we have the sort, right? Which sort item. Oh, I know it is like a string, so it might be a little bit confusing for you. So I'm going to just use a number to make it like easier. So let's say I have 2, 1, I don't know, 10, negative, let's say 0, right? Right. So if I know that if I sort it, becomes 0, 1, 2, 10. So let's see. Let's sort, right? And now I have list again. So I have 0, 1, 10, right? Again, sort is similar to the append. So I think you cannot do this. So let's see. I'm not sure, actually, I forgot. So let's see. I think that you cannot do this. Yeah, I mean that if you do this, it doesn't give you anything. Again, none, right? So that is why you have to do it in one line. Okay. And you also have the reverse, which means that you just reverse like the order. So if you do like 2, 1, 10, 0, it makes it 0, 10, 1, 2, right? From right to left. So now we are going to send you guys to the breakout room and to really use the list to create this cool window here with 4 rectangles. So Pooja is going to send you to breakout rooms, I think.
I'm going to open breakout rooms. Just wanted to let everyone know that we do have some mentors unable to attend just because of midterms and things like that. So you might be with a different mentor, and mentors, just be aware you might have some different mentees in your room. Right, I'll open all the rooms. All right, I think everyone should be back. I think you're muted, Nima.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so like the point of the exercise was to use list, right, to create like these 4 rectangles. Now we can see like these rectangles are moving with the mouse, and there are 4 different like locations, right? So the x is always 0, right, because there are the beginning right here, right from left, right. But the y is changing, right? As you move down, right, from top to bottom, the y is increasing, like the y coordinate of the corner of each rectangle, right? So you can create a list, right, that only has the y coordinates, right? Because the x is always 0. So you can use the x0, right? And then you can get access to those values with the index. So for example, the first rectangle can be at 0, the second one can be at 1, the third one, which is at index 2, is y is 2, and then y is 3, right? So these are the 4, like the 4 y values from this y list, right? That tell the program what, like the y values for the like the top left corner of each rectangle. And then we have like the mouse x as the width, and then the height is always 30 fixed, right? So you can see the width is changing. Sorry, yeah, the width is changing with mouse, but the height is 30, right? Now, one thing to notice here is that, so there are 2 things actually to pay attention. So one of them is that if you want like to change like the position of the list, you don't need to do it like, you don't need to change like 4 lines, right? If you don't use this, you can say, okay, I have 50 here, right? I have, for example, 130 here, and so on, right? You can use the values, right? But if someone say, okay, I made a mistake, and like you have like to increase like the numbers like by 1, for example, right? So you don't, it is easier like to change like all the numbers in one line quickly, for example, right? Rather than like doing it line by line, right? The other thing that you want to notice here is that something is repeating. So you can see here, I have like rectangle here. I have like the same rectangle, but the only thing that changed here is the y value, and this is just another index of this y list, right? So this gives you an idea that maybe there is a way that we can like use like a better approach, right, to avoid writing these 4 lines and only use 1 line, right? And that is where the new concept loops comes in. So now we're talking about the loops, and then you see how we can get rid of these 4 lines, right, with the help of for loop. So let's see. So what is for loop? So for loop is a way to repeat a code again and again, right, for a certain amount of time, right? So for example, you have like beginning of the loop, then it starts, do something, and then the loop finishes, right? So for example, if you think that, for example, something is repetitive, or something is you see something like again and again, it should give you an idea that maybe you can get some help from the for loop. And the lists are also great, like the list is usually a good way to store the values, and then they're usually work with for loop. So you can use for loop and list together, and then I shortly show you how we can use both of them together. So before that, let's talk about what the for loop looks like. So let's say you go to the dentist, right? The dentist wants to, of course, like they can like take picture of your teeth. But let's say like she wants like to examine like each tooth one by one, right? So it starts, for example, like the top left, and then like the first one, and then go through all of them one by one, and just say check, 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 right? So for now, forget about the step 2 here. So let's say you have, let's skip this one, right? So let's say you have 1, 3, 4. So you'll go to dentist, you check the tooth, and then go to the next one, right? And then sometimes maybe the tooth has some sort of problem, and they want like to, for example, do some stuff on it, right? So now you can add some sort of if condition in the for loop, right? So you go through the items in the for loop, right? You check each item one by one, and at some point, if you see that something is wrong with the tooth, you want like to, for example, make a note, right? So for example, this tooth has this problem, right? So now you can see that we can also add if condition. I'm not saying that like you have to use if condition in all the for loops, but you can see how we can combine these concepts together, right? You can have for loop, you can have if condition, you can have both of them together. And now it gives you a lot of ability, right? To do some cool things. So now this is like, for example, one of the ways that we can use for loop, right? So let's start simple. Let's say I have a list of grocery stores, grocery stuff. So let's say this one, right? And I want, for example, someone to print this item one by one, right? So I can say, okay, so for item in list, print item. This is how the for loop works. So you start with a for, right? Then you use a name, right? It can be any name, right? It can be your name. It can be your name. It doesn't matter. Right? But the computer says that, okay, so for your name in list means that for any item that it sees in the list, right? Assign it to some sort of like a temporary variable and call it like your name, right? So now you can have print your name. Right? So it goes through each of these items one by one and try to print them. So print them, print onion, goes to the next one, print cheese, goes to the next one, onion goes to the next one, print eggs, right? But your is not like a good name, right? So it's better like to use, for example, in this case, I can say item, right? Maybe instead of this one, I can use bread, right? Of course, you can use any name here, right? It's better to use a name that if someone else wants to read your code, it will be easier for that person, right? So I prefer, for example, in this case, use item. So for item in list means for anything that you go through the list for any item, for any element, right? Assign it to a temporary variable and call it item. And then you have to play with that item. For example, in this case, I print it, right? Or let's say I have some numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And instead of item, I may call it num as number, right? Again, you can use anything you like. And then instead of number, I want to add 1 to that number and then show it. So I can say, okay, print num plus 1, right? I can first add 1 to it and then print it, right? And don't forget that this is temporary variable, right? It doesn't change the list. It goes through the list, the item of the list, and then print it. So for example, in this particular case, when I say just show a num plus 1, it doesn't change the list itself, right? It doesn't change, for example, if you just check the list again, it is still 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So you just go through it and then print that number, like whatever number that you are at, plus 1. Perfect. Right? So let's say this is like, let's see. Yeah, so now we have a quick question. So let's say you have a list of numbers, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 5, and then you have an initial value for x, which is 0, right? And then you have this for loop. Go through the numbers, and then you add it to the x. So let's see what's going to happen. So what is the final value for x? So Pooja is going to create a poll for you guys, and then you can choose the correct answer here. 3. Okay. 10. Okay.
I'll close it in around 15 seconds.
Okay. Perfect. So now we have like 2, 3, 5, 10, and the correct answer is 10, right? So why? I'm going to put myself in the computer's shoes, right? And then see what's gonna happen. So the numbers are 2, 3, 5, the x is 0. I start from here for number in numbers, right? Again, don't forget that if you even do a small change in the name of a variable, it's a completely different variable, right? So this number and numbers are completely different. This number is a list, right? Because the numbers is equal 2, 3, 5 is a list of 3 numbers. This number is a temporary variable that goes through each element in that list, right? So in this list, I have 3 elements, 2, 3, 5, right? So for number in numbers from left to right, so I start from 2, then x plus equal means that you add that number to this x to the left one, and then assign it to the same variable. So x, which is 0, plus 2 is 2, makes the x 2, right? Then you have 2 plus 3, right? Because now you are in the second position, like you are at index 1 now. 2 plus 3 is 5. So now your x is 5, right? Then finally, your number is 5. So 5 plus 5 is 10. So I'm going just to do it quickly here. So if you have numbers, 2, 3, 5, and then you have, I call it total sum. I'm going just to add them, right? I make it 0 because I haven't added any number yet, right? But I want just to add this number. So I say, okay, total sum is 0. And then I start from for num in numbers, right? Then you can say, okay, I have my total sum so far, right? Or you can say, of course, I'm just saying that this is not a good name, right? This is just a name to help you understand what's going on. So I call it total sum so far, right? So total sum so far is 0, and I add num to it, right? So let's print it here. So let's print this total sum here after we update it. So now if I print this, you see it is 2, 5, 10, right? So after the first sum, it becomes 2. After the second sum, it is 3 plus the previous one, which is 3 plus 2 is 5. Now 5 plus this 5 becomes 10. Now we have, don't forget that we have here, the print here doesn't have any indent, right? So as I said before, indent is really important. So in for loop, for example, if you remember for the if, for example, condition, we have if, and then we have a statement here. And if we have a new statement here without any indent, that means that that is the end of that if block, right? That if condition, right? And condition statement. But here we have the same. Here we have the same thing. So if you have like the for, right? You have indent. That means that you are now inside this for block, right? Inside this for block. So whatever you are doing here related to this for block. But as soon as the computer finishes the for loop and goes to the next line and see that, hey, there is no indent here. Okay, so now this is a completely new line. So after it means that you already finished the whole for loop, right? So if I do it here, I only have one number, and that is 10, which is after the for loop finishes. Okay. So now we are going to do the same thing that I did before, but this time with a for loop. So let's see here. I have this example here, right? So in this exercise, we remember that the idea was to create a list, and then we want to get access to the values of that list with the index 0, 1, 2, 3, and then just try to create a rectangle with each of those y values, right? As a y coordinate. But now you feel that something is repeating here, right? You have 0, 1, 2, 3. So basically, you are just going through the values of the values, right? So why not using a for loop, right? So how can I use a for loop here? You can see the value. What is changing here is just this part, right? Because the other one is 0, mouse x 30. So I can just say, okay, so for example, y in y list, right? Create a rectangle with 0, y, mouse x, and 30. And I can just get rid of it. So what's happening here is that you are going through the item, the element, which is like these elements here, one by one. And I call it y, right? You can call it y value, right? Y val. Or whatever thing you like, it doesn't matter. But y is like, is a good name because it is really, it's a single letter. It is readable, right? You can easily understand what's going on here, right? So for y in y list, for any number, I call it y, and then I use that number here. So if I create this, now you can see I created the 4 rectangles with just a for loop. Perfect. So I'm going just to stop it here. Okay. So now you can see how how powerful for loop is, right? You can easily replace those 4 lines with a simple line. I mean, that is, instead of like 4 lines, if you have like 200 lines, right? Do you have like the time to go through like 200 like write 200 lines? Right? Doesn't make sense, right? So you can just do the for loop. Perfect. So this is like just to show you like how the computer thinks, right? So it starts like from the beginning of the for loop, right? Then it starts from 50, goes to it, then move back, then goes through the loop, right? And whenever this y value reaches the final value in the list, right? The computer knows that there is no other value in that list, right? It's just the end. It's going just to finish the loop. That's it. So you don't need to be worried about that part. So we are going to send you guys to the exercise, to the breakout room for the exercise number 2. So Pooja is going to send you guys to the breakout room. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here.
I think everyone should be back.
Hey, so I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Perfect. Okay. Let's see if I can here. Okay. So where were we? Okay. So the exercise 2. So the idea is to use like the list, right? Again, you can create like the list and then trying like to create some sort of like circles by getting access to each value using the index. But of course, we learned about like the for loop, right? So you can go through like the each of like those values and then create like a circle, right? This is what we are doing here. So if you notice here, what is happening is that the y coordinates of each circle, each single circle, is increasing from 0 to like the maximum one right here in the down. So that is why, so for example, we have like the y position 10, then we have like this statement which added like the speed to it, right? They're trying to add it, right? And of course, since the computer needs to know the previous value for the y position, we cannot use it. We cannot like set the value inside this function. We have to set the value outside, right? And then use the global keyword to make it global, right? And then we can change it. But like, how can we use like for loop? So for the for loop is like to create these 5 circles, right? So there are 5 circles, but just be different like position for the x values, right? So we can have like the x position, right? And then we can just go through them one by one, right? And then create a circle. So just quick thing, if because I said that we need to have an indent, right? But if I remove this indent, now you can see that we're going to have an error. It says expected an indented block, right? It's like line 19. I don't have the line number. So what can I do? I can create the line numbers. Okay, so line 19 here. It says that there is an indent, indented block. Yes, this is the for block, and then after that, I need the indent. Right? This is how you can try to read the error, understand what it says, right? It can help you to debug your own problem, right? Your code. So now you can see like I have like the simple like for loop that just goes through like the x position values, and for each x position, I create a new circle, and that's it. So as I said before, for example, in the dentist example that we had here, right? We had this step 2, right? So as the dentist goes through like the tooth, it tries like to check, for example, if the tooth is healthy or not, right? So it's like an if condition, right? So we can combine the concepts together. We can use, for example, if inside the for loop or vice versa. So in this case, for example, I want like to use the if statement, right? Like the condition to create like these colors. I want to create like yellow for the first 31, and then, for example, the like 2 circles red, right? So now if I, for example, take a look at the values here, I can see 3, 90, 170, 150 for the first 3 circles, and then I have 210, 270. So if I want to separate these 3, I need to create a condition so the computer can understand I want to make these 3 yellow and these 2 red, right? So I can use a simple if condition. I can say, okay, I'm going through the position for x, and if x is less than 150, sorry, bigger than 150, right? Make it red. Or let's do this. For example, if it is less than 150 or less than or equal to 150, right? Of course, you can say 160, right? It still works, right? Let's do it 160 just to make it a little bit different than the slide. Of course, you can go through the slide yourself, right? So let's try something a little bit different here. So you have if x less than or equal to 160, right? You want to make sure that the 3 1 are yellow. You can say fill style yellow. So let's do double quotation. It doesn't matter, but I use double quotation, and then else, if not, then do fill style red, right? So if it is less than 160, make it yellow. But if it is else, means that if it is bigger than 160, we want to make it red, right? If I run this, now we can select this cool thing, right? We have, so let's make the background black here. Okay, perfect. So I have like 5 balls, 3 of them are yellow, 2 of them are red, right? So there's also another way. I'm just going to show it to you, right? You can think about it later if you like, if you are interested in that. So it's up to you. I can create a default color, right? Yellow. And then I say, okay, my color is yellow, right? It's set to, I'm not creating a new shape, right? I just, behind the scene, I know that like the color is going to be set to yellow, right? And then I can say, okay, so if the x is bigger than 160, in that case, just change the color, right? So I know that the color by default is yellow, right? So for example, let's forget about this if here. So now I can see all of them are yellow, right? But now if I want to just change it just for two, for example, circles that has like a large values, for example, in this case, bigger than 160. And say, okay, so if in that case, do this. So I don't need to, for example, do if else in this case, right? So do the same thing, but just another way, right? So if you want to do some sort of practice later on your own, it would be nice to think about others, like other ways, right? Try new approaches, right? Try to see if you change something, what happens, right? So this can help you to understand like how the computer works, right? How you should code or what style is better or prettier. Okay, so then we have like the same concept here. You see if we have the for loop, right? The computer goes through them one by one. So it goes through the first one 40. So now let's say the computer knows that x is 40. So now it comes inside the for loop. So for the 40, this becomes false because 40 is not bigger than 50. So as soon as it becomes false, it goes to the next one. The next one is else, right? There's no elif here. It's else, right? So you can say fill style yellow, right? So the next is yellow. And then we don't have indent here, right? Compared to this indentation here, I mean. So this if block is going to end here. So after the if block, after we set the color, we create the circle, right? But now we are not at the end of this. So the for loop continues. So the next value is 80, and we have the same thing. And then 120, we have the same thing. But as soon as this x gets to 160, so then 160 is bigger than 150. So this condition becomes true, right? So the computer runs this one and doesn't go through the else anymore. So after this, the color is set to red, and then we create a circle. It is a good idea to think like how the for loop works, right? So when your code gets more complicated, you should be able like to see things, right? You should go through like you should see the things like the computer, like how the computer reads your code, right? Because at the end of the day, you are trying to write something that the computer understands and not the code. So it is a good idea to understand how the computer reads your code. Okay, so now I think that we are good to go. So we have some sort of exercises. We're going to go to the breakout room to do these cool exercises and come back in 7 seconds. Okay, so thank you for I'm going to stop sharing here.